Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this presentation is titled The Captain is God. Go against him and your career will be over. How CRM changed all that. Now, I can tell from some of the comments, I did some videos on dealing with difficult captains, and I could tell some people may not be fully aware of the history of how cockpits used to operate. And that's no problem. And I love your comments. I thoroughly enjoy your comments, but unless you're ridiculously old, I'm 73, unless you're reasonably ancient, you may not know how bad things used to be. Now, I came out of the military and, rank has its privileges. The guy above you, he told you what to do. He gave you an order and that's what you did. And you didn't really question it. So coming right into the airline circuit at that time, it wasn't unusual. I was hired before CLR, as they called it at United, or CRM, which is now universally called Cockpit Resource Management, existed. At that point, the captain was essentially God, and you do what you were told. Now, getting in a fight with the captain, ooh, that could end your career very, very quickly. This just simply did not happen. Now, the happy crews we have today, the get along, the interactions, the what do you think about this, that did not always exist. Back in December 8th, 1972, a United Airlines 737 crashed coming into runway 31 at Midway Airport. 43 of the 61 people on board were killed. 2 people on the ground were killed. Now, the crew were very experienced in the aircraft. That wasn't the issue. Both the captain and the co-pilot were very experienced. But what happened is, and this is before stabilized approaches. This is before CRM. The captain was a bit of a hot dog, and he came in on this particular approach. He came in high and fast. He came in 700 feet above the marker. The ceiling was at 500 to 600 feet. He realized he was fast, so he extended the speed brakes. And on the 737-200 now, if you bring up power with the speed brakes extended because of this accident, the speed brake lights flash. I don't know who's operating the 200 anymore as far as the 737, but if you are, that's why that light works that way. So he came roaring out of the sky. He punches out at 500 feet, going 1,500 feet per minute down. Well, he immediately pulls back to level off for the MDA on the localizer approach, adds power, forgets the speed brakes are out. They go right into stick shaker, and they go into aerodynamic stall, and they crash short of the runway. And it's actually amazing as many people survived as they did. Now, okay, well, this captain had a history. He was known to be a hot dog. I flew with a captain. I was a co-pilot on this crew, and I flew with a captain. And for some reason, this accident came up in discussion, or maybe it was cockpit resource management came up. I forget which, but we're talking about this. And the captain told me, he says, I was one of a group of co-pilots. We got together and we went in mass to talk about this guy. We went into the chief pilot's office and we said, this guy's dangerous. He's a hot dog. He's going to kill somebody. And what did the chief pilot do? He turned to us, all of us, and said, if you ever come in here complaining about a captain again, I'll fire all of you. So that's how good that worked. And that's the way the things were back then. Well, was that 737 accident sufficient to make changes? No, it wasn't. It took more persuading. But in 1978, I'm still a pilot in the Air Force. I'm looking at getting out, but I remember this accident. On December 28th, 1978, United Airlines Flight 173 was going into Portland, and they had a gear problem. They actually had a good gear situation, but they had a problem with the actuator. It was corroded, and it actually, when the gear came down forcibly, it actually damaged the downlock switch. They didn't know that the actual gear was in a downlock position. Again, we have an experienced crew here, but we got a problem with the gear, and they troubleshoot this thing for almost an hour, driving around with gear and flaps down. There were 189 people on board. Amazingly, well, you can see the aircraft is fairly intact. Amazingly, only 10 people died in this accident. two crew and 8 passengers. The the problem was that nobody was monitoring the fuel state, and as a result of this accident, the safety board believes that the accident exemplifies a recurring problem, a breakdown in cockpit management and teamwork during an emergency. Well, I remember seeing a video on this when I was hired, and the last time they turned away from the airport, they had 1,100 pounds of fuel on board. Now, there's some issue with totalizer inaccuracies on the DC-8 and stuff like that, but they were showing 1,100 pounds, and they turned away. And the engines shortly thereafter started flaming out, and this was a bad situation. And regulations and procedures are written in blood, and this was one that, because of it, it had a good outcome, if you can say that. And that good outcome was that United Airlines instituted the industry's first CRM for pilots in 1981. Now, I was hired in 1979. Things weren't going well with the economy. I was furloughed, so I'm back out on the street. I'm working for Cessna Flight Test and then Boeing Flight Test and that. So they institute this program. I'm one of 750 people that was furloughed. I am 10 from the bottom of the seniority list. So when the first people started to coming back from furlough, the head of training, the vice president, met him personally, and they had dinners and stuff like that. By the time they got to me on the recall, I saw a videotape of him welcoming people back, and the videotape had been shown so many times, it was in really bad condition. I was out for 4.5 years, 1,692 days, but who's counting? But okay, I come back to the line. I've still got 17 days of probation to complete. And as I told my son, who later got hired, I said, please don't take 6 years to complete a year of probation. It's not a good thing. Well, I come back. I'm a second officer on the 727. I'm probably one of the few pilots who had not been through CRM. And the captain comes up to me on one of my first flights, and he says, what do you think of the fuel? And it's like, what do you mean? What do you think of the fuel? I looked at him and I said, I'm the second officer, which was to imply that I don't have an opinion on the fuel load. It's lucky if the captains even ask the co-pilots what they thought of the fuel load. But to ask the engineer, no. I just made sure we got whatever fuel he signed for. So I was kind of taken aback. I didn't know what the heck was going on. I didn't know about this CRM stuff. I had just come back from furlough, trying to complete my last 17 days of probation and, just keep my nose clean. Well, of course, I finally went to CRM, found all about it, and we had a number of captains. And when I talk about flying with difficult captains, we have a number of captains who, they were the people this was directed at. Well, as you can imagine, the people who need it the most are probably the people who respond to it the least. And the captains that were a problem before were the captains that were a problem later. Well, if you had a problem with a captain, and typically, captains don't have a problem with first officers because they're captain. But if you have a problem with your captain, you go to professional standards. Now, the Airline Pilots Association instituted a program of professional standards. That's where crews could air their grievance kind of safely, because if you went to the company complaining about another pilot, somebody could get fired, and that wasn't a good thing. So you went to the ALPA professional standards people. Of course, guess what happened? Some of the people who were the biggest problems were the people on professional standards. I talked about the Lee rays. Okay, well, there was a friend of mine who was having a problem with him, and he decided he's going to go to professional standards, and he mentioned it to the captain he was flying with, and the captain says, that's great. Who do you want to talk to on professional standards? Do you want to talk to Jim Lee Ray or John Lee Ray, because they're both on professional standards, and another captain who was just as egregious at being a 9-1 captain, as they called him, was on professional standards too. So it was like, So the response was, well, we had to put up with Vern Lee Ray, and then Jim and John, his sons, got hired, and we had to suffer through them. And I guess now it's your turn to suffer through them. Well, probably the only positive outcome of this that I can mention was the fact that Jim and John, I forget which one, had a son that wanted to get hired by the airline. And I don't know if this story is true or not, but supposedly the interviewing captain says, this airline has suffered 2 generations of Lee Rays. I'm not going to subject them to a 3rd generation. Well, CRM was good for the cockpit crews, and it did a lot of good. The captain's still in charge. He still makes the final decision. I've had, situations where I talked to the captain and I said, hey, I think we should do this. And the captain says, no, we're going to do this. And that's the way it is. He makes the final decision. CRM doesn't mean that it's a democracy. It's still the captain in charge. But some airlines have more difficult cultures than others. And there was a case of a JAL 747 that the aft pressure bulkhead blew out due to a maintenance error, I believe. And it took out all 4 hydraulic systems on the 747. Well, the flight attendants in the back knew that there had been an issue, but they were hesitant to call the cockpit because you simply didn't do that. And whether they could have saved the aircraft, like Captain Haynes did in United 232, the DC-10, is debatable. And that was an absolutely miraculous landing too. A number of people died, of course, but a lot of people survived. That thing could have rolled over and gone in from 39,000 feet, and nobody would have blamed them at all. But as a result, they said, we need to teach flight attendants about CRM. So they did, and it was very good because the flight attendants now were not afraid to talk to the captains. Now, I was a captain for 25 years. This is my final flight. This is my purser, my lead flight attendant here, and we got along great. The flight attendants, and these flight attendants used to operate kind of in groups, in that we had the flight attendants that just flew Hawaii all the time, and they were a great group. And then we had the ones that flew Beijing, or we had the ones that flew Europe. And they all were different and interesting and very senior, and never really had any problem with the senior flight attendants. I got along with them great. Like I said, I was captain for 25 years. I only had 2 issues with flight attendants, and they actually kind of occurred more early in my career on the narrow body. Now, this is a stock picture. None of these flight attendants, I have nothing bad to say about them, but I wanted a stock picture of young flight attendants. And, well, they can give their opinion about, there's problems with the flashlight. Maybe there's something about the door they don't like, or some issue in the cabin, medical kit, something that's appropriate. But as far as mechanical issues, that's really not their purview. And on the, I said narrow body. There was one on the 777. And now I'm a line check airman. I've been on the airplane, I don't know, at the time, probably 7-8 years. And there was a certain situation when you had ground air on the aircraft and the right-hand pack was operating, that it made kind of funny noises back in the galley area. And I was aware of it. And I had a male flight attendant who said, this aircraft's unsafe. And I go, why do you say that? And he says, well, that pack sounds terrible. It sounds wrong. And I said, no, that's, given the situation, the airflow, that's normal. Well, I and the mechanics determine if the aircraft, we're the final authorities on determining if the aircraft is safe. And I said, no, you're wrong on that. This aircraft is safe. Well, he says, I say it's unsafe. Well, I say, I'll tell you what, you're not in the position to determine that. And if you're uncomfortable, I welcome you to leave the aircraft and we'll get a replacement. Well, he finally backed off and we went. The other situation was kind of an authority thing. And I had a male flight attendant who came up to me and I had some question about the back of the aircraft. And he says, no, the back of the aircraft's mine. He says, you're in charge of the cockpit. I'm in charge of the back of the aircraft. And I looked at him and I said, if you have any doubt in your mind that I'm in command of this aircraft from the tip of the nose to the tail, I said, we need to address that right now because one of us is going to leave this aircraft and it is certainly not going to be me. He looked at me for a second and he backed off and says, you're right. Anyway, that's my experience over almost 4 decades with the beginning of CRM until the situation now, which is a much better, much friendlier, much more effectively working cockpit or flight deck. It took a long time to get here, and it's good where we are now. And that's a bit of the history if you're a new person and not terribly familiar with it. We've come a long way. Thanks for watching.